The film begins by showing a pretty intense scene where terrorists have taken over a school, keeping teachers and students as their hostages. Alston, a police commander, is in a tight spot and sends in his team, hoping to rescue everyone and nab the bad guys without a hitch. He's adamant that his team can't mess up, because he doesn't want to lose his job over it. Fast forward to 16 long and tense hours later, and the terrorists haven't budged an inch. They're not letting those hostages go. That's when Special Forces Captain Bryce Mason steps in. He goes to Alston and told everyone to sneak into the school and catch these terrorists off guard. Hearing that, Alston gives him the green light, probably feeling a mix of desperation and hope. Without wasting a second, Bryce rallies his crew. Dwayne Miller, with his nose in the school building blueprints, is figuring out the best way for them to sneak in. Meanwhile, Steven Rogers, the guy who knows everything there is to know about weapons, makes sure all their gear is good to go. Then there's Connor Connolly, a no-nonsense Special Forces dude, ready to lead a secret evacuation through an underground route. His younger brother, Tim, along with a few other tough guys, is right there with him, all set to pull off this daring rescue mission. And so, the intense operation to save the hostages begins. After the preparation complete, Bryce decides to have Steven and Dwayne create a distraction by firing at the school building, pulling the terrorists' attention away so that Connor and his team can slip in unnoticed. Soon after, Connor's group gets to where the hostages are, and suddenly it's an all-out firefight between them and the terrorists. Even amidst the chaos, Connor is on fire, taking down terrorists left and right, but then the leader grabs a woman, threatening to blow everything up if he takes another step. Tragically, the leader, feeling trapped, does set off the bomb, resulting in numerous casualties, though somehow, Connor and his team survive the explosion. Time passes and we see a dramatic change in Connor's life. He's no longer in the Special Forces, but just a regular police officer, having been demoted after things didn't go as planned at the school. His buddies, including Bryce, weren't so lucky and got fired by Alston. Then, one day, Connor's task is to pick up this teenager, Joaquin Smith. However, just before Joaquin can hop into the car, a bunch of gangsters start chasing and beating him up. Connor, not just about to watch, steps in, and things escalate so much that he ends up shooting one of the gangsters to protect Joaquin, who was about to get seriously hurt. Now this is when Tyrone Pettis, the notorious and heartless gangster boss of the city, steps onto the scene with his crew. Connor, thinking fast, tells Joaquin to get out of there ASAP. Pettis and his guys then rough Connor up, and it looks like they're going to finish him off, but Pettis has a change of heart. He sees an opportunity to use a cop like Connor for his own gain, so he spares him for now. After the incident, Connor gets hauled in by his bosses about the gangster he shot. There he tries to explain that he was just trying to save Joaquin. But bam, his superiors hit him with the heartbreaking news that Joaquin was found dead. Connor is shaken and is pretty sure Pettis is behind Joaquin's death. However, despite his suspicions and attempts to justify his actions, Connor gets fired for using his gun the way he did. Meanwhile, Pettis, even though he's this major drug dealer, is out there playing the generous guy, handing out money to kids to make himself look good in the community. After finishing his public display of kindness, Pettis kicks back at a cafe. That's when Alston, our previously mentioned commander, comes into the picture. Turns out he's been helping Pettis keep his dirty drug business under wraps. Alston's not just there for a friendly chat, cause he's asking Pettis for some financial backing because he's got his eye on running for a city office. After Alston takes off, Pettis, seeing an opportunity, approaches Connor. Here's Connor, freshly fired, and Pettis asks him to step into the shoes of the now-dead gangster in his crew. But Connor's not having it. He refuses Pettis flat out because, in his eyes, he doesn't owe Pettis anything even though he got fired for killing one of Pettis's men. Meanwhile, back at Connor's place, his wife Candace is going through a whirlwind of emotions. She's just found out she's pregnant. Part of her is absolutely thrilled about it, but there's this shadow of worry too because money's been tight, especially since Connor took a pay cut when he went from the Special Forces to a regular police job. In the car, after mulling it over, Candace shares the pregnancy news with Connor. His heart swells with joy knowing they're going to have a baby, but he's also quietly freaking out inside about how they're going to manage financially. He keeps to himself the fact that he's been fired, not wanting to dampen Candace's happiness, figuring he'll find the right time to tell her later. To bask in the joy of the pregnancy news, they decide to celebrate with a meal out at a restaurant. Switching scenes, we see Pettis and his right-hand man, Spade, visiting the widow of the gangster that Connor shot, offering condolences and handing her some money to help out. But then, after leaving her place, Pettis reveals a dark plan. He tells Spade to kidnap Candace, thinking that'll force Connor to work for him. Not long after, Spade jumps Connor as he's heading back to his car and snatches Candace. Then, when he wakes up, Connor wrists aching from the handcuffs inside his car. Panic sets in when he notices the empty passenger seat that Candace isn't there. Then Pettis strolls up, his voice dripping with threat. He wants $2 million from Connor as payback for his dead guy, or else Candace is gone for good. Soon after, he gives Connor an address, suggesting he could rob another city gangster to get the cash. The clock is ticking with just 12 hours to save Candace. A whirlwind of thoughts spins through Connor's head as he speeds towards the given address. After a bit, he takes a deep breath, trying to think straight about how to save his wife. That's when he decides he needs help and heads to his brother Tim's place. At that time, the reunion isn't a happy one. Tim, still upset since Connor got kicked out of the Special Forces, won't even let him through the door. But desperate times call for desperate measures. Connor forces his way in, and a heated scuffle breaks out between the brothers. Only when Tim finally hears the dire straits Candace isn't kidnapped, pregnant, and in danger does he relent. Despite their strained relationship, Tim's not about to turn his back on family. He agrees to help Connor save Candace and their unborn child. Meanwhile, at the police station, Alston's under the media spotlight, holding a press conference about the whole messy situation with Connor. He promises to deal strictly with any cops who harm innocent folks. But then, unexpectedly, Bryce storms in, accusing Alston of making those statements only because he's secretly involved with the city's major drug mafia, Pettis. Alston, without uttering a word, just withdraws to his room, ignoring the accusations. Then Bryce leaves him with a stern warning that he and his buddies, all of whom were wrongly fired from the police force, are keeping a close eye on him. Next, Bryce makes his way to Tim's place, where he finds Connor. Without skipping a beat, Connor opens up about Candace's kidnapping and his desperate need for help to rescue her from Pettis. Bryce, with warmth in his heart, agrees to lend a hand and doesn't stop there. He rounds up his old crew to help out too. Soon after, Bryce rings up Dwayne, now working at a small shop, and Steven, who's spending quality time with his wife, pulling them back into action to help a friend in a moment of crisis. Soon after, Connor and his buddies, all of whom used to work in Special Forces, met up in a workshop. They had a serious mission to plan a daring robbery, but it wasn't just any robbery. They needed to sneak into a gangster's base to rescue Candace. There, Dwayne spread out a map. His eyes darted across the roads, trying to find the quickest way to get into the gangster's place without getting caught. At the same time, Steven was busy making sure they had all the gear and weapons they'd need. Once everything was set, they didn't waste any time and headed straight for the gangster's lair. When they got there, luck was on their side. The gangsters were in the middle of a big party, not expecting trouble. That meant the security was kind of lax, making it easier for Connor and his team to slip in. Even though they had to fight and Connor got shot, they managed to swipe all the money and wreck the drug stash kept there. After everything back at their own base, Connor's face was clouded with sadness. Memories of friends lost in past missions haunted him. Bryce, noticing his pain, reassured him, trying to lift his spirits by reminding him that what happened wasn't his fault. Soon after, they torched the car they'd used for the heist, making sure the police wouldn't be able to trace anything back to them. On the other hand, Alston knew something was up with a recent robbery at a gangster headquarters in town and was on a mission to find out who was behind it. There, he managed to find the only eyewitness that was still breathing to get some answers. Interestingly, the eyewitness pointed towards Pettis as the guy calling the shots for the robbery. But Alston, not wanting any part in Pettis' nasty business, decided to eliminate the witness and made it look like he tried to save him by pretending to rush him to the hospital after his death. Meanwhile, he reached out to Pettis, letting him know he was none too pleased about the robbery. But Pettis just shrugged it off, claiming he had no part in it and tossing in that the evidence would prove it. Pettis was pretty confident that, with a bit more digging, the police would find Connor and his friends to be the real culprits, keeping him out of the hot seat. On the flip side, Connor and his crew were dealing with their own issues. They had money from the robbery, but it wasn't enough to free Candace. So his friends chipped in, handing over their shares to help him out. A bit later, Connor reached out to Pettis to arrange an exchange, and even with tensions high, Pettis handed over an address, promising to stick to their original deal. However, Spade wasn't thrilled with Pettis' choices. He'd rather just wipe out Connor and Candace, erase any connections to another gangster headquarters robbery. Candace, aware of the danger, tried to bargain for their lives, vowing to keep quiet about the whole ordeal if Pettis would let Connor go. At the same time, the police were in a huddle, trying to figure out the puzzle of the recent robbery. They were stumped cause there's no leads and the only eyewitness was now dead. But something wasn't quite right. A few of Alston's coworkers noticed. They picked up on some weird vibes from him during the meeting. His actions were a bit off, and they started to think maybe he was keeping some secrets. Over at Pettis' place, the night was moving along. Pettis told Spade to grab some food for Candace and said he was going to get some shut-eye for a bit. The moment Pettis and Spade were out, Candace thought to run away. But darn it, all the exits were locked tight. So she had to scramble around, trying to find another way out. Meanwhile, Connor and Tim were on a route headed straight to Pettis' headquarters. Their conversation took a bit of a somber turn, talking about how Tim missed their mom's funeral. Tim was swimming in guilt about it. But then, out of the blue, Tim asked to make a quick pit stop at a rest area. Connor thought it was just a regular bathroom break, but Tim was secretly dealing with some heavy stuff. He'd been sneaking illegal drugs, hoped ever since he got kicked out of the Special Forces. On the other hand, Bryce and the crew thought they were done for the night and decided to head back home. But then Bryce, while cruising back, got a bit of a shocking call from Alston. Turns out, Alston had figured out Bryce was mixed up in that gangster headquarters robbery. Panic mode for Bryce. He immediately rang his mates, trying to cook up a plan before the police could swoop in. However, Steven couldn't make it because he was knee-deep in a spat with his wife, so it was just Dwayne who came to huddle up with Bryce. Meanwhile, at Pettis' place, Candace was tucked away, hiding in a room, while Pettis was on a mission to find her. He told all his gang to get lost, so he could search for her without interruptions. He was peeking into every room when bam, Candace nailed him with a hammer. But Pettis, even while reeling from the blow, snagged her before she could dash away. Now, over to Connor and his younger brother. They stormed into Pettis' headquarters, ready to make a deal with the mafia boss. Connor's heart swelled a bit because he was on the brink of rescuing his wife. Pettis, meanwhile, was on a different agenda, snatching money from Tim, who owed him for illegal drugs. Tim, ever since getting axed from the police special forces and seeing civilians die because of a bad call his team made, was just trying to numb it all and got tangled up in Pettis' dirty dealings. At that time, Tim was in a tight spot, no cash on him, but he stepped up and said he'd put himself on the line if Pettis would let Connor and Candace go. Pettis, seeing Tim's genuine vibe, agreed to let them slide, but Spade wasn't on board with Pettis' call and boom. A scuffle broke out between them. This was the chance. Connor and Tim seized the moment, took down Spade and Pettis' other goons. Out of the blue, Bryce and Dwayne turned up, and soon Pettis was backed into a corner. Pettis, realizing he was no match for these ex-Special Forces dudes, threw a curveball. He invited Connor and his mates to team up since they all had a bone to pick with Alston, who'd sacked them. Pettis spilled that he was just a low-key gangster until he got mixed up with Alston, the rotten cop, who pushed him into the big league crimes. However, Connor wasn't keen on partnering with his wife's kidnapper, but reckoned Alston needed a taste of his own medicine and agreed to join Pettis' plot against him. So, Pettis geared Connor and the guys up, and off they went to a bank where Alston stashed his dirty money. Meanwhile, Alston was nearby and a couple of his colleagues hopped into his car, grilling him about some drug confiscation money they thought he pocketed. Amidst this, Connor and crew caused a boom, blowing up a car to divert the bank guards who were Alston's men, and just like that, a shootout kicked off right there in front of the bank. At that moment, Connor's crew planned a bank heist, but everything went sideways when Alston and the local cops turned up, making it a hot mess of bullets and chaos. There, Dwayne got shot, which made Connor and his buddies bulldoze their way into the bank, with even good-hearted Tim becoming collateral in the bullet storm, leaving Connor heartbroken. Just as the Special Force cops were closing in, Steven swooped in, picking off some of the forces from afar before crashing his car into the bank to help his friends escape with Alston's ill-gotten gains. But Stephen's heroic moment was cut short by a bullet from Alston, who, not skipping a beat, also shot his nosy colleague. Luckily, other cops got that on tape. Undeterred, Alston and his squad chased after Connor's speeding car. At the same time, Candace was at the airport, fingers crossed, hoping Connor and the gang would make it in time for their planned exit from the city. Bryce, however, chose to stay back as his son was in the hospital. He thought he'd give Connor and Pettis a fighting chance to reach the plane by holding off Alston's crew. But alas, his brave stand ended under a hail of police bullets. In the end, Connor and Candace finding happiness far from the city chaos, while Pettis stepped away from the dark gangster life, trying to find some normalcy. They agreed to share the heist money with the families of their fallen friends and victims of a school hostage crisis. As for Alston, his corrupt, murderous actions caught up with him, and he found himself behind bars as the screen fades to black. A bittersweet ending to a roller coaster of a story. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is if you're a police officer who gets fired, don't worry. Just team up with a gangster, rob a bank, and take down corrupt cops to find happiness and redemption in the end.